oh, had he not run, or had he not had a criminal background, or had he not came off threatening, or had he not fought back. Like there's always like these, you know, attempts to make a justification as to why these people like end up getting killed. Like,
right.
What would your response be to that?
When you're black, you can't be on that porch.
Right. But then the old Russian lady could just be like sitting down and be unbothered, you know?
It brings refuge, and we ran and hide by light of the moon.
Hey, what's up? Welcome back to my channel. My name is Achille, aka Sochella, for those of you that are new. Yes, this is my guest, Jonathan, who you guys have met in other videos. Today I actually wanted to add on to my Shellstration playlist and have a discussion about the recent situation that resurfaced about Ahmaud Arbery, who was killed in February by an old police officer, and his son shot and killed him when he was jogging, and a video recently resurfaced of that. So I know for me at least it made me feel like a certain way, or like kind of like brought up back some emotions. But like, how was it for you specifically?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I can't say that I was shocked. You know, I think, you know, being black in this country, you know, that is like that story, what happened to Ahmaud, is a part of our history, you know, from 1619. So I can't say that I was particularly shocked or anything. I'd actually heard about the story in February, but there was no footage and everything. So, you know, I think that, you know, when the footage comes out and people can actually see what happened, you know, I think that's, you know, it usually has a more emotional pull on people.
And for me specifically, like, I hadn't known about it too much, and I was kind of disappointed in myself because just like I try my best to kind of like stay up to date with certain things, but this case unfortunately happens so often that like literally it happens within a month, and then like after that, like that person is forgotten, you know? In terms of like you being a black man in the US, like how has your experience like been altered, or like how would you say that like your relationship with police has been like growing up?
Like any black kid in the inner city, there's definitely a tense relationship from just the beginning. I can remember being 5 years old, you know, early 90s, Chicago, South Side. And, you know, I remember, you know, one time I had my hat cocked to a certain side. I can just remember, you know, I was trying to emulate and copy the guys who I saw when I was growing up, you know, on my block. And so I remember my mother was just like, you know, she kind of scolded me a little bit and was like, I don't want to ever see you, you know, cocking your hat like that, you know. And I thought it was maybe, you know, even though I was 5, I knew that the people around my neighborhood were gang banging, right? So I thought it was because she didn't want me doing that because it showed I was in a gang or something like that. But she said, you know, they'll kill you. Don't ever let me see that you wear your hat like that because they'll kill you. And I thought she's talking about other gangs. And then I said, who? Then she said the police. And so that was kind of the first time I kind of heard that. I said, what does that mean, right? And then I think, you know, once you get a little bit older, and I was about 8 years old, and that's when she sat me down and had the like full-fledged talk with me about, you know, this is how you know, speak to police officers. Yes, sir, no, sir. You know, don't reach for anything. Don't, you know, all these things to like survive, right? Which ultimately is like, don't be too big, but don't be too little. Don't stare them in their eyes, but don't look at the ground. You know, all these different things that black youth are told to do so they can survive police encounters. So, you know, that was about, you know, so those two instances came from when I was 5 and 8 years old.
I guess the parallel, like my experience is that I came to the US when I was 5 years old. So when I came, or like just like in terms of my upbringing, my mom was more so kind of like putting an emphasis on make sure you are like cognizant of like the people that you hang around, make sure you are like get home by a certain time. We lived in a very like strict household, so it's kind of constantly like be cognizant of like what you're bringing, like putting out there, and then also like what you get yourself involved in. So I had more so like a black and white perspective on like, especially when it came to like police interactions. I just assumed that police end up, you know, getting the bad people, and if you don't want to end up having a bad interaction with them, then you just be good, or you don't hang out with people, or you stay away from like gang activity and stuff like that, you know. And I think that was like my perspective for a while. And I remember being like 11, and I was in like a youth group or whatever, and we would have these community discussions, and we had to put together a community discussion within our neighborhood, and we had a whole bunch of youth from different areas. And though our program specifically was like refugee youth putting this together, we were participating with other like groups, and as well as like inviting like other high schools and schools in our area. So we heard the perspectives of multiple people or whatever. And I remember that being the first time of me like seeing like, okay, like maybe there's like some kind of tension with like the police in the community. But I never really like
Just a little bit.
just a little bit. But I was still trying to figure it out though. But then I got a little bit older, and I remember like my first like off-putting experience with police was when I was like about 14 years old. I was going to a Bulls game, and I had just gotten dropped off. I think it was like 10 p.m. or something like that. And at the time, like you have like in Chicago, I think we still have it. Like there's a curfew, like you have to get in the house by a certain time and stuff like that. So they had dropped me off at like the corner because my street was a one-way, and I was walking, and as I am literally like approaching like my door, a police person just ended up kind of like stopping me. She patted me down, and then she put me in handcuffs and put me into like the back seat. And I was just telling her, so confused, like what do you need me to do to get out of the situation? Like I like fully ready to participate, because that's kind of like how I was taught, like as long as you participate, then you're just gonna end up like getting out of the situation. But I was just like super confused. Like I was like, I can call my uncle right now. Like he was literally like right there. Like I wasn't trying to like break the law, you know. But yet again, they still insisted on writing me like a warning citation, and then they ended up taking me upstairs to my my apartment. And like I just kind of had to like keep it going or whatever like that. It was just like, all right, this is what it is. But it's just like at this point they're already like making us like criminals to an extent, even at that young of an age. Would you say that there were like other like more memorable like interactions that you've had with the police that like really showed you that they are more so like profiling you?
Yeah, I mean, I've had, in my adulthood, I've had many experiences with the police, driving while black. In my adolescence, two instances come to mind. One where, a cop was kind of threatening to plant drugs on me. And then the other was, and the other one kind of stands out to me more because this other one I'm gonna talk about is more like a life and death situation. So, I was about 14. It was, I lived in an apartment complex. And so the apartment complex had this like no loitering rule. And so, my neighborhood that year was pretty hot. For a couple years, it was pretty hot in terms of, things being distributed in the neighborhood, certain types of violence in the neighborhood. So we had like a task force that was like the security for our apartment complex. And so they kind of like put these real rigid rules in, like no loitering, things like that. Black people, like, we loiter. Like that's what we do, right? Whether it's you driving through the city of Chicago and you see like folks hanging in front of a store, or if you're in Africa and you walking down the street to the market, black people loiter, like internationally. That's what we do, right? It's like it's in our blood or some DNA or something like that, right? Loitering. And so, we were loitering. We were hanging out in front of a building, not doing anything, just being young and hanging out. It was, we didn't want to go to the basketball court, so we were hanging out. And this cop, this task force cop just kind of started running up on us, but he had his hand on his gun the whole time. So it was about 7 of us. And so we like all just like disperse in different directions. Like when you grew up in the hood, it's like we're kind of taught like you don't really interact with the police. It's not like you necessarily afraid of them. It's just like they over there, we over here, we don't, if we don't need to interact, we don't. You know, when they come our way, we move around. And so that's what we did. We ran. You know, he was running up on us, so we ran. And so there was like this little gangway that, you know, we had kind of had to get out of our apartment complex. And so me and my one friend, like, we're running. Mind you, we haven't done anything. And then, like, the task force cop was just like, you know, he pulls out his gun and he points it at us. He's just like, I don't remember everything that he said. I'm sure he said some other things, but the thing I remember is, don't effing come back here. You know, he said that like a couple times, don't effing come back here. And so I'm like, I live here. You know what I'm saying? Like, I live here. So, you know, my dumb self, I say that I live here. And so then he's like, oh, where do you live at? What's your apartment number? And I, you know, comply and give this guy all my details. And then, you know, my friend on the other hand, he didn't give me the memo. Like, like he gave him like the cop like the wrong address to everything. Like, you know, so I guess he ended up getting off the hook. But, you know, I didn't go home right away. And when I got home, you know, my mom's was there waiting. She was not happy. You know, I'm sure for a multitude of reasons. You know, she wasn't happy that the police were knocking on her door for something her son did, or allegedly did, right? I'm sure the police said some extra stuff. But, you know, also I think, like, once I told her that, like, he pulled his gun on us and stuff, I think that made her even more angry because, you know, she's had these conversations with me about how to conduct myself with the police for years, and it's like, now you're in a position to do what I've been telling you to do, like comply and don't do this, don't do that, and you know, I didn't do it. So yeah, she wasn't happy. She wasn't, you know, pleased at that situation. But for me, it was a learning experience. Just you know, and I think looking back now and seeing all of the different cases of teenagers being murdered by the police, you know, just for me, a learning experience and seeing how things could have turned out differently.
I think that in itself is just like a lot of pressure to be put on like a young man that's like that age, you know, like to essentially say that like you make one wrong move and that, you know, that could be your life, you know. I think it goes back to just like the criminalization of like young black people, especially young black men. And I know for me at least, like, it's interesting that you bring up the experience you had with your like building, because I remember even though I didn't have like the most like toxic relationships with like official police, I did have certain relationships with like security guards or like building task force, for example. And I know like for me, I grew up in a Section 8 building, so it's like they're really strict about who came in, who came out. And it's like even with like my brother, he's like 4 years older than me. And it's like obviously I was younger, and then also like I'm a girl, so they kind of don't make as much assumptions about me as they make about like my brother, for example. But I remember when he would hang out with his friends, like, you know, they would like security would give them a hard time and stuff like that, or like people would make it seem as if like, oh, you can't loiter in front of your building. It's just like, you're just trying to get some fresh air, you know, like. And I think what's crazy is that like we also had like a porch that people could actually be able to like hang out.
When you black, you can't be on that porch.
Right. But then the old Russian lady could just be like sitting down and be unbothered, you know.
And I think, you know, it's, you know, this is something that black men go through. I think black women go through it also at alarming rates that aren't talked about. Black people, you know, whether you are, you know, gay, straight, trans, cis, like, I think folks go through these, you know, when you're black, you have these negative interactions with police.
Yeah, I think even for me, like going to like a Chicago public school, like the security of our buildings were even like really like much stricter than it was like in like the burbs or like, you know, other schools on like in like certain like affluent areas. Like I remember we literally had a metal detector, and it's like,
it's conditioning.
Like, you couldn't get in without like being checked or whatever like that, you know what I mean, or always being on edge about like your interaction or whatever. And even then it's like people would pat us down as if like we are going into like a prison or something, you know. But yeah, like I know you mentioned like in both cases that you had that like you like ran. And I know like a lot of times, especially with, like to tie it back to the issue with Ahmaud Arbery, they were talking about how, you know, oh, had he not run, or had he not had a criminal background, or had he not came off threatening, or had he not fought back. Like there's always like these, you know, attempts to make a justification as to why these people like end up getting killed. Like,
right.
What would your response be to that? Or like if you ran into like a person like that had that kind of logic?
I mean, one thing I think the big thing is, you know, experience, right? So I think on a personal level, right, it's about experience. I think as a black person, you know, our experience in this country is different, right? I mean, particularly with the police. So I think with, you know, I remember I was speaking at a university one time, and, you know, this young white woman was kind of talking about, you know, I was speaking about my experiences with the police, and she was like, well, you know, my dad is a police officer, right? And so I think that instantly, like, we have a different experience, right? So he's your father, so he's probably very nurturing, all of these different things for you. But, you know, when he's in my neighborhood, I don't see that nurturing side, right? So I think a lot of it is about experience, but it's also not necessarily, you know, the older me, the me who is like read Marx and Asada and Malcolm X and all these other folks. That me understands that there's a larger, police apparatus and system at play, right? That it's not necessarily about an individual cop or not, right? I mean, who cares? You know, I'm sure most police officers are potentially decent people when they're with their family, right? I'm saying potentially because I know there's some statistics that can dispute what I'm saying, right? But I guess my main point is not about individually if the person is good or not. It's about, you know, if the person is good, but the system at its core is racist, then what does it mean, right? And the system of policing is very racist. It's rooted in slavery, and in its essence is just, you know, a very racist thing to, you know, kind of, you know, police are a tool of the state to protect, you know, the capitalist system. So, you know, so really it doesn't matter if a cop likes me or not individually, right? If you live in New York or you live in Chicago and the policy of the day is stop and frisk, it doesn't matter if this is a nice cop or not. Like, they're gonna stop and frisk. You know, they're gonna harass black folks and pull black folks over and check on black folks and all these different things. It doesn't matter if they listen to Backstreet Boys or not. You know what I'm saying? Like, when their job says, hey, we need these numbers up and we want them to be in this neighborhood, in this community, they're gonna make it happen.
True. I know you, like, you know, were in Ferguson, and obviously, like, Ferguson specifically for the U.S. was like a pivotal moment because it really, I guess, politicized people that were not already politicized, and it like, you know, kind of like lit a fire in people. So would you say it would have done the same to you, or had you kind of already like awakened?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I think for me going to Ferguson, I was already kind of like politically active and engaged. Like, I was already kind of like considering myself a Marxist and reading all of these different things. So yeah, I mean, I had already been a part of many different demonstrations and things like that, organized anti-police brutality marches and stuff. So I was pretty seasoned when I went to Ferguson. So I can't say I was necessarily like surprised or I had an epiphany there. What I can say is that in Ferguson, this was the first situation in where, you know, I had been at rallies where the police were in riot gear and had batons and were on horses. I had been in demonstrations like that. But this was the first time, like, where I was like, okay, they came ready for war. You know, like, you're seeing, you know, the police in tanks. You're seeing AR-15s and M16s locked and loaded. And you're like, all I got is my camera. You know, hands up, don't shoot. Say it like woke me up, but it hardened me, I guess. If anything, it really instilled me to understand what I was really up against.
I know, like, us being in Chicago, another like pivotal point for us was also like the killing of Laquan McDonald, who was shot 16 times by a active police member at the time. And I remember us being at a we were at an action or something like that in like off Michigan Ave, like, which is like the commercial district. And even that was like, to an extent, like there was a lot of police around, you know what I mean?
Yep.
And it's just like there's the constant reminder that they're not looking at us to protect us, but they're looking at us as the perpetrators of like the quote crimes that they think that we're gonna do, or like they make all these different assumptions, whereas like other people who demonstrate, white people or even like white supremacists at times, can protest in peace, you know?
They can have a whole locked and loaded AK-47 and, you know, be at the Capitol building.
Yeah, right, exactly.
and at the Avis, right? They're free to do it, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like, I feel like there's always some type of like national response, but lately I think people have become a little bit numb to like certain situations, that they see it and then they'll maybe like share something on social media and then be like, you know, rest in peace or whatever, but they kind of just go about their merry ways. Like, I guess based on, you know, just knowing how active you've been, like how do you keep going? Like what keeps you like, yeah, I guess what keeps you like passionate about these issues, and then also like what do you feel like we can do to continue to like stay active and not only like, you know, just so that we don't necessarily like have these people's like name in vain, you know? Or just kind of like a plaque on the wall or like another name added to the list.
I mean, I think for me, it's, you know, I hate this system. I hate the system for what it does to people. I hate the system that allowed 70% of the cases originally in Chicago to be black people, you know, getting harassed, and, you know, the sirens and people getting pulled over left and right. So I think it's that, but I also think it's a strong love for people. You know, I have a strong love for people, working class people, black people. But I think the main thing that keeps me going is that I believe we can have a better world. I think that's the main thing. I think some people can be, you know, I think this world can grind you down and make you cynical and just, you know, this is what it is. But for me, I firmly believe in my core that we can have a better world and that we will have a better world. I think that's another key part, is like, I firmly believe that we will have a better world, but I have to play a role in that. I can't, you know, idly, we won't have a better world if I don't play my part. We won't have a better world if you don't play your part, right?
So I want to say thank you to my mom. She tell my smoke. How low, wherever you say I will go.